Shalom, I'm David Benkof from Broadway Maven. And I'm thrilled to convene this session on an often overlooked but crucial aspect of theater making, and that's book writing. What does a book writer do, and how and why? I have asked our first panelist to share some thoughts, so I'm going to introduce him first, let him share his idea, and then I'll introduce the other panelists. Robert L. Freedman is a Tony-winning book writer and lyricist, best known for A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder. For which he won the 2014 Tony Award for Best Book of a Musical. He co-wrote the teleplay for the 1997 television adaptation of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, and received Emmy and Writers Guild Award nominations for Life of Judy Garland and My Shadow. Known for his sharp wit and structural precision, Robert brings intelligence and humor to every project he takes on. And I'm also proud to call him a personal friend.
Hi, everybody. So, book writer, I believe this is called Unsung Heroes. Well, heroes, I don't know, but that's for others to say. But certainly, unsung, Winnie and I, one of the other panelists, we were both in the very first year, the very first class of the graduate musical theater writing program at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. Hi. Well, it's still going on. This is incredible. But anyway, one of our teachers was Arthur Lawrence, and who you don't know Arthur. He wrote the books for West Side Story and Gypsy, both of which are considered two of the best books of musical theater history. And I remember him saying, if you want to be a book writer for musicals, I'm sorry, I said it wrong, I'll start over. If you want to be famous, don't be a book writer. And I never forgot that, and I decided I didn't need to be famous, I just wanted to do it. And that was the exciting part. Arthur was full of wisdom. But one of the things I just wanted to say is that a lot of people don't really know what a book writer does. Some people think that what a book writer does is write the dialogue. Well, that is true. But a book writer does a lot more. A book writer fashions the story, if you will, from whatever the source is. Maybe it's an original idea, or a novel, or a film. There is some kind of concept, and the book writer runs with that and comes up with a story. And what is, I think, a better term for it is the structure of the show, which is more important than people realize. And by structure, I mean, what's a scene and what's a musical number, but also, more importantly, what you would say basic playwriting, what's the beginning, what's the middle, what's the end, or crisis, conflict resolution. That structure is very tricky in musical theater because of the songs, and because it's a musical, and because there are certain expectations that come with that. And they say if a musical succeeds, it's because of the great score, and if a musical closes, bombs, it's because of the book. Again, you will not only be not famous, you will be ablamed. So, for me personally, one of the things I like about writing lyrics, as I did, I co-wrote lyrics with the composer and lyricist Stephen Lundback for A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, is if you think of the songs as being the high point of every scene, or the emotional high point, then I didn't like stopping the writing to let somebody else write the emotional or dramatic high point of any scene. So it's really fun for me to be able to both write the book and the lyrics. But I've also just written the book. I've also, as I think others have, written a book for a show that already had existing songs, which is a whole other thing. So I guess that's what I wanted to say, is this is what a book writer does. And a book writer is also sort of the watchdog over the whole production for when things happen that just don't make sense, or that, you know, people may have a great idea for a change, they may have a new member, they may have, I don't know, whatever happens to the character. The book writer really understands the characters. Of course, the composer and lyricist should too. But a book writer is sort of the gatekeeper of all of that, to remind people so everyone's on the same page of what this story is about. Anything that's not telling the story, it usually means it's going to get cut or it should be cut.
So, John Weidman is a Tony-nominated book writer whose work spans bold, original concepts and inventive adaptation. His collaborations with Stephen Sondheim, and we're going to keep clapping, Pacific Overtures, with their intellectual depth and non-traditional storytelling. Beyond Sondheim, Weidman wrote the books The Big and the dance-driven Contact, and he has been a longtime writer for Sesame Street, earning multiple Emmy Awards. A Harvard graduate with a background in history, Mr. Weidman brings sharp wit and structural precision to every project. And Winnie Holzman is a book writer and screenwriter best known for Wicked. The blockbuster musical that reimagines The Wizard of Oz through the lens of female friendship. Her television credits include being the creator of My So-Called Life, the acclaimed 1994 TV drama that set a new standard for teen storytelling. She also wrote the screenplay for the two-part Wicked adaptation. Part one of which has been a tremendous success with critics and fans alike. Known for her emotionally resonant writing, Ms. Holzman crafts stories that balance humor, heart, and depth. And I'm Broadway Maven David Benkof. I'm embarrassed to introduce myself, surrounded by such greats. I've made Broadway appreciation both my hobby and my career. I aim to help my students and my readers think more deeply about musical theater. There are surveys on your chairs to help me decide what to offer next year, as well as a place to put your email address for a free subscription to my Substack Marquee. You also have a postcard with a QR code for a free month of the Broadway Maven. I am thrilled to be at BroadwayCon for my third year. Mr. Weidman, one of my favorite projects of yours is the rewritten book for the classic Anything Goes.
I'm sorry, what?
Is the rewritten book for the classic Anything Goes.
No.
It is engrossing, well-structured, and really, really funny. How is rewriting a book different than writing one?
Well, we had, the new book for Anything Goes was written by me and a guy who was a writing partner of mine at the time, Tim Krause. This was redone for Lincoln Center, 1988. Anything Goes debuted on Broadway in 1934, and was a great success then, and it was, came to sort of a staple in high schools and other community theaters around the country. There had never been a first-class revival of the show. It had not appeared on Broadway for 50 years. And that seemed like a long time, given the collection of songs that make up that Cold War score. I mean, it's a list of some of his most successful theater efforts. You're at the top, I get a kick out of the So Greg Mosher at Lincoln Center, with the support of Anna Krause, who was Krause's widow and Tim Krause's mom, really wanted to see if there wasn't some way to approach the show again and see if we could put it in front of a first-class audience in 1988. And the answer was, Tim and I looked at it, the answer was yes, and we did the work. The show was quite successful. But the goal was to reimagine the musical in a way that would make it feel as if it had still been written in 1934, but that it was paced and organized in a way that audiences had come to expect in 1988. In 1934, there were pages and pages of not unentertaining dialogue in between songs, and the songs had very little relation. They were certainly not anything that we would recognize today as a book song. They were great songs, but everything was kind of its own thing, and the whole show had kind of a review-like quality, something that audiences in 1989 lost patience with almost immediately. So that was the task, and we found that we were able to, by moving some of the songs in the score around, we could take a song like You're the Top and turn it into something that actually felt like a book song, felt like something which needed to be sung at that point because of the crisis between two of the characters. This was true of virtually everything that was in the score. We also took a lot of material which had been cut from the score over the years, since 1934, and put that together. So we felt like we were really honoring the Croatian. The last curtain call, Lincoln Center in '88, was a huge picture of Cole Porter that was flown in from the flies. So he got the biggest hand, which he certainly deserved. But that was the task. And you know what? It was challenging, but it was a lot of fun because it was like puzzle solving. It was like moving pieces around until the music stopped and actually put it in front of the audience. But it was a pleasure.
Thank you for your answer and thank you for your show. Ms. Holzman, when you visited my class, you shared that in adapting Wicked, you didn't spend a ton of time with Gregory Maguire's book, but instead focused on his brilliant concept of telling the Oz story from the perspective of the Wicked Witch. But I want to know about the 1939 movie. Were you constantly watching it as you crafted your script and screenplay, or did you rely on memory from childhood, or was it out of your mind all the time?
Oh, it was never out of my mind. Stephen and I, that was a vow we made to each other, a sacred vow. That, because the movie, the movie from 1939 was an indelible part of our childhoods. And it, can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yes.
And it meant a lot to us emotionally, artistically. We had such reverence for that movie and the brilliance of the movie. It's a great American movie. So we wanted to make sure, be very careful that we never denied the reality of the movie. In other words, just as when people learn improv, they're taught, don't deny the other person's reality. In other words, if somebody makes up that they're fishing with a fishing rod, don't unless that's the exercise, don't come in and pretend that that they were whipping somebody. Like, go with the reality that they put together. We were very, very obsessed, you might almost say. Certainly, and that continued through both of the movies. The times that I was really, what Stephen always used to say, what we used to say to each other was, the movie's like a documentary. In other words, it happened. Stuff like that, those events happened, but there's so much that is happening right off screen that you can't see, that throws the events you're seeing into an entirely other light. And those events were left out of the story. Because that's the entire theme of Wicked, or one of the themes of Wicked is that you're not being told the whole story, which is a line that I wrote in the play and also in the movie. You're not being told the whole story. There are important key aspects of the story that have been buried, suppressed for nefarious reasons, for corrupt reasons. And so our whole task was to make sure that we never, we didn't want anyone to ever watch Wicked either on stage or in a movie theater and then go home and look at the Wizard of Oz movie and say, oh look, we wanted it all to make sometimes a strange kind of sense, but a sense, so that all of those things could have all happened, if you see what I'm saying. That's my not so short answer.
When Brian Yorkey, the book writer and lyricist for Next to Normal, visited the Broadway Maven class, he told us that writing gazintas is one of the hardest things for a book writer to do, and he defined the term as the line of dialogue that goes into a song. Is he right, and how do you write a good gazinta?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of tricky, crafty parts about writing a book, but before I respond to that very briefly, I just want to agree with sort of the last thing that Robert said about book writing, which is that ultimately it seems to me that the book writer's task is to be the custodian of the entire piece, the story, the plot, particularly as things begin to happen fast, as they do in the musical. It's the book writer's job to have an eye on the entire piece and to manage when things are going off the rails or maybe there's a book back on it. And that attention to structure is much more important than 3 lines of dialogue which can be swapped in and out and so you get exactly what you want. As far as setting up songs go, yes. I mean, cueing a song can be tricky, although if the writing of the show is proceeded in a way which I think is most productive, which is to say that the composer, the lyricist, and the book writer basically have all been together and in conversation forever until they decide it's time to separate and for each person involved with his or her particular part of the piece. If that's happened organically and correctly, when dialogue wants to turn into a song is something that will kind of take care of itself. That doesn't mean that you don't have to find like a tightly perfect 16 syllables. The perfect 3 lines of dialogue that make the song inevitable, and make the song happen. And it's hugely satisfying when you can actually accomplish that.
I'm having a little trouble hearing John Weidman.
Okay.
And it's the great John Weidman, I meant to say.
Can you hear me now, Winnie?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, good.
I wish I could see you.
Yeah, I'm around the corner here.
Anybody else on gazintas, or should we move on?
I have one.
Okay, please.
I think the most criminal thing you can do as a book writer is to give away a song in the gazinta. You know, the line, and you sometimes see that and I just cringe, because then the song becomes superfluous. Why do they need to sing it? They've already said it. And so that to me is the number one rule, is gazintas.
And that, just to add to that, that's not just true of the 3 lines of dialogue that cue the song. It can be true of the entire scene, which needs to disappear into the song, even if it's your favorite piece of writing. Because if you tell the audience something first, and then you're going to tell them again in the song, you're making it tragic instead.
So let's talk about second act trouble. What is it, and how do you avoid it?
Don't have an intermission.
Don't have an intermission, right? That's it. Anybody else? Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
Look, I'm going to say something incredibly depressing, which is that it's trouble from the minute you begin to the minute you end. It's a kind of waking nightmare most of the time, with little bits of incredible joy and incredible happiness and joy in between. But in other words, like how to avoid trouble? I mean, first of all, don't be a writer. Don't try not to write a musical. It's nothing but trouble. We actually had first act trouble, but I've said that for years because our first act was the one we really were wrestling with, like just with panting, exhausted. But we had plenty of trouble in the second act too. It's just that I think of it as first act trouble because supposedly you're supposed to have the trouble in the second act. We had it all the way through. So it's like, it's just a myth, and the whole thing of avoiding trouble to me is like, please, it's not going to happen.
Also, I would just add to that, I mean, if you've got a problem in the second act, the problem needed to be solved at the beginning of the first act. Although Arthur Lawrence has been involved here, and I'll say a report from something Arthur described to me about mid-century musicals, not this century, the previous one. Occasionally a show would have a reading, but there were no workshops, there was no 9 years preparation to get a show on. Shows usually were revealed both to their creators and audiences at the same time when they went out of town and opened in New Haven or in Boston. And that everybody would then begin to furiously go to work on what needed to be fixed, starting typically at the beginning of the show. And I've said one of the reasons why a lot of those shows have such weak second acts is that they just didn't have time to get to that part of the show.
I had a interesting problem with The Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder because it's established near the beginning that this one character needs to bump off 8 other characters in order to achieve his goal. And the problem was, if you split the characters, 4 get killed in the first act and 4 get killed in the second act, the audience is going to come back after intermission and go, yes, this is going to be more of the same. So we had 7 out of 8 killed by intermission. There was only 1 person left. And then we could set up a love story, a love triangle, and we were able to explore that. And it turned out to be a very good decision.
Can a show succeed with a wonderful score and lousy book, and vice versa, a great book and a so-so score? And Robert suggested the question to me, so we're going to start with you.
Well, there's no wrong or right answer. I think, like I said already, that if the show doesn't succeed, it's the book's fault. So I guess one could argue that a show can't succeed unless the book is right. On the other hand, there's so many review formats, so many jukebox musicals, so they succeed more. The books may vary, but they succeed on the basis of the score that people walk in already knowing in most cases. However, the really good ones have very strong books. I think of both Beautiful and Jersey Boys. They're very strong books. They're really telling a story. And the music is used in the sort of biographical nature of those shows.
Cool. I would just add to that, and I'm not going to name the shows because it's sort of not fair, but I do think there are a couple of shows that were quite, setting jukebox musicals aside for a moment, there are a couple of shows that were quite successful because they had books that were written by guys who really knew what they were doing. And those shows could survive even if the score was not the composer and lyricist's best work, because the piece holds together as a piece of drama. Whereas the flip of that, it just doesn't work. I think people just get tired and lose interest. If they're not seeing a play, then they can hang on to it.
Is there a show that you think has a perfect book? And if so, what?
Well, I think Gypsy has a pretty perfect book. I don't like to use the word perfect because I think that's antithetical to being human, and these are entities. These are little works of art made by human beings. What is that? The word becomes a little meaningless in a way because it's not the aim to be perfect, whatever that would mean. The aim is to bring you somewhere, as an audience, to give the audience an experience that, something Arthur used to say to Robert and I in class was, you have to actor-proof it. And that's really stayed with me. And what that means is, obviously, so you're probably way ahead of me, audience, but what it means is that you would craft something, the lines that you write, the moments that you're creating, the scenes that you're creating, if the actors will simply stand and be heard and say the lines enough so that everyone can hear them, that they will give, even if they're not the greatest actor in the world, or maybe even if they're not a good actor at all, if they simply enact those moments, that string of moments, the audience will still be taken somewhere. I mean, actually, I've just realized that I want to also add Fiddler on the Roof to my answer. Because I really think you could just see, you know, a middle school production of Fiddler on the Roof. And if people just said the words and it was loud enough so that everyone could hear, I think you'd be taken on an incredible journey. And that's what I think of, not as perfect, but as what my goal would be, to have it be that you wouldn't have to have, it's wonderful to have amazing actors, but you wouldn't have to have them in order for the audience to have an amazing experience.
I don't know if I'm the only one who wants to do this, but Fiddler on the Roof.
I would say this is changing the answer to the question slightly. It's like, I can't think of a show with perfect either. I can think of some that I think come close. But I can think of a handful of people who wrote books for musicals, who over and over and over again executed the craft with extraordinary skill. And Joe Stein wrote the book for Fiddler, who's certainly in that group. Arthur Lawrence, for sure. James Lapine today. Yes. And the guy who doesn't get enough credit for it because he is primarily thought of as a lyricist. But Oscar Hammerstein's books are extraordinarily amazing, and often written with enormous audacity. I mean, you know, if you look at the book for South Pacific, it begins with two kids singing a little fragment of a song, and then there's a big book song with two ballads in it. And that's how that musical starts. You know, even by then, musicals were sort of expected to start with a great big number that would establish the world of the piece. But Hammerstein was an extraordinary practitioner of this craft. So I know I didn't really answer your question, but let's hear it for Oscar.
I recently had the opportunity to see a fantastic production of Fiddler on the Roof with Jason Alexander as Teddy. And you know, you just walked away with that, not only with admiration for the performers and a fantastic score, but that book, as I said, that book is so incredible, completely holds up every single word so carefully crafted and thought out. And the thing is, I think we've all seen Fiddler, as you mentioned, in all kinds of productions with various degrees of talent. And there are other shows like that, Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, but also I think immediately of Guys and Dolls and music. I've seen them in high schools, I've seen them in summer stock, I've seen them on Broadway, and they work. If they're loud enough, as I say, I agree. Because they're just so solid. Because the books, and obviously the scores are great.
I also saw the Fiddler on the Roof that Jason Alexander was. You had a favorite performer.
Oh yeah, there was this actress who played Grandma Seidel. She's actually here. Oh, I'm there too.
So there are people in the room who would like to write books for Broadway shows as a career goal. Anybody want to raise their hand? Yeah, some of you do. What advice would you give?
People get asked this question all the time, and the knee-jerk answer is like, if you could think of anything else to do in your life, do that. But if you feel compelled to do it, I don't know. I would love to hear what you guys think. And I think just
Winnie's got her hand to her ear, so
just expose yourself to as many musicals as you can. Read them, listen to them. I mean, one falls into the habit of listening to scores rather than going back and actually, if you're interested in Fiddler, and actually experiencing the entire piece. And often, looking at what the book writer has accomplished is easier to see on the page than it is when you're sitting in front of the production. So I would just encourage you to just sink into as much of the best stuff as possible, and then maybe some stuff that's not so good, because there's a lot to be learned from that too.
I think that's how I learned to be a book writer, by reading the books of musicals. I also, of course, listen to the scores like crazy, but there are 2 volumes of books for musicals that came out, I think, in the 70s probably, because I remember having them when I was, a teenager. And I don't know what they're called, but they're in libraries, they're in bookstores, they're still in print. And they've got books from all of the really great musicals. And, you know, you read them, as John said, you really discover what it's about. And you just read them and read them again and go see as many musicals as you can. And as many plays, because it's an offshoot of playwriting, and it's just as important.
Did you have anything that you wanted to share?
Well, I wanted to be encouraging and say that, you know, when I got into the musical theater writing program, and I was there with Robert, I hadn't been thinking my whole life, oh, I want to write the book to a musical. I wanted to be a writer. And I was writing poetry a lot for years. I'm not going to encourage anyone to do that because it's up to you. But I do know that poetry writing, because of the nature of distilling down words, of finding of word choice, of rhythm, I think it really prepared me for dialogue writing of any kind, in screenwriting, in playwriting, and they're all different kinds of writing, and book writing for a musical. So I'm just gonna encourage people. I want to be encouraging and say, just keep writing, because writing itself, you know, you'd be amazed how some kinds of writing can prepare you without even realizing it for another kind of writing. You know, so if you just keep that muscle going, writing for theater in general, like I was in a comedy group for years, and we wrote comedy sketches for years. So and we were performing. So it's like anytime you're writing anything that's going to get exposure or that you're going to have to deal with an audience, that'll teach you so much.
Have any of you had a moment where an audience reaction completely changed how you saw a scene?
Probably, I'm sure. Yes, because audience reaction becomes everything. I mean, at first, I feel like you're in a bubble with your collaborator and collaborators, if that's the case, and you know, you really have to be, and I think you have to not be focused on what are other people going to think of this. I think you have to be focused on what do I think would be beautiful here, or what do I think would be funny here, or what do I think would be upsetting here. But there comes this point in the process where you have to really notice how audience is reacting. And so to me, I can't choose one moment. I would say that this was another Arthurism. Robert, do you remember? That he used to always say, watch the audience. I don't know if you remember that. But that was something that maybe, you know, I don't mean that, you know, I don't want anyone to take that like you're only focused on the audience and you're not caring how you yourself feel about the moment, because I think that's the most important thing, how you and your collaborator feel. You know, if you believe a moment is working, I think you should start with that. But if an audience is over and over again bored by something, you have to ask yourself, wait a minute, you know, like the great John Weidman was saying something about diagnosing a problem from Act 2. There might be a problem in Act 1 that is leading to this problem in Act 2. You have to be very careful how you diagnose it. But certainly, you know, we had this with the wizard scene in second act in Wicked. There was always rustling and coughing in the second act when she came back to see the wizard. Always. Certainly in San Francisco, but even in New York. And when we went to London together, we were all together again. Joe Mantella was there, I was there with Stephen, Idina was there because she did our first few months in London, and we rewrote that scene. We redid that scene, and then we put it back into Broadway that way. Yeah, because it just wasn't good enough.
I mean, I have had that experience, the one that Winnie has just described as well. It's most useful and least terrifying when the experience you're having of the audience is that the scene is the right scene, but they reach a point where they're sort of tolerating it because it's just going on too long. And the audience will tell you a lot about what's enough and what's too much. And those are the kind of problems that are pretty easy to address. If they're telling you something just feels wrong, and as Wayne said, sooner or later you have to, particularly if you're writing comedy, they're not laughing, it's not funny. Try and persuade yourself that it's their fault, but that doesn't work.
Yeah.
I have a vivid memory of being at Sundance, where we did a 3-week workshop, and there was a presentation of the show, and I was sitting in the very back row, and the audience, which is made up of all the other people at Sundance and their plays, you know, they were cheering, they were loving it, it was fantastic. And then it was probably the second act, there was an actress sitting in front of me, who I respected, and all of a sudden she started, I'm behind her, she started to do this in her seat. She got bored, and it was really obvious that it was too long. And so that's why you need to watch it. You don't have to watch them looking at them from the front. They'll tell you from the back.
So that's 2 answers. Robert, when you visited my class, you told us that you've written the screenplay to a movie version of A Gentleman's Guide. And obviously, Ms. Holzman, you've done so with each act of Wicked. How is writing for the screen different than writing for the stage? And which is better than?
Well, I don't think either is better at all, but I think that they're very different, and yet, you know, in the end, you're telling a story. What does the character want? How are they going to achieve it? What are their obstacles? What's getting in the way? You know, those, how can you best reveal their innermost secrets? Those kind of questions are true everywhere, no matter what the medium is. But for me, with this experience of Wicked, it's incredible to have the opportunity to go deeper. We just, first of all, when we split it into 2, it was because Stephen Schwartz and I really wanted the freedom to, as artistically as we knew how, to go deeper into all of the situations, all the characters. So basically, we took every beat of our musical and we went further with it. And a lot of it has to do with, of course, with the director, with the great John Chu. He was amazing for us. But what I'm saying is that we wanted it to be a movie. We wanted people to experience it as a movie. We didn't want people to say, oh, they took the film and they shot it. I mean, they took the show and they just shot it. That's not, to me, speaking of boring, that's boring. And so how can we deepen the experience for people? How can we give them a cinematic experience? It's not just about opening up, like, oh, now they're outside and they're not like in a classroom, or now their classroom is bigger. You know, that's a bit dull. It's much more about finding the ways to show and reveal and expand on what you've already got, so that there's more nuance, there's even more. In our case, we were able to, for instance, show her childhood, which we were not able to do on stage. We were able to, you know, that does a lot in terms of just getting to know a character. Robert?
Yeah, I think just in general, film is a visual medium. As I say that, I am reminded that the physical stage production of Wicked is incredibly visual. I don't know if anyone who hasn't seen it, but a film is a whole different experience. And so, anytime you're adapting something, there are things that you gain, as Winnie pointed out, there are things that you lose, but it's a completely different medium, and you have to, you know, obey those rules and keep that in mind. I have written this screenplay for Gentleman's Guide, but we still don't have directors and actors. I haven't gone through that experience, but when I do, I'll come back.
But Robert, can I ask Robert a question?
Sure, please.
Well, while you were adapting it, did you discover things about the story or about the character that, in a way, you went, oh, that even surprised you a little bit, or?
Yeah, actually I did. I mean, I had a lot of fun with it because I was thinking visually And so I felt there was so much that could be shown that's going on in the characters' minds that can't come out in dialogue, and can't come out in song even. And showing, you know, like the thing that you hear most often in terms of criticism of work of film and television is show, don't tell. Show us. And in the film you get to show. And so it was a tremendous amount of freedom and a tremendous amount of fun to be able to do that. And yes, I did come to a new understanding of some things that I hadn't thought of before, sure.
So, Winnie, that's what's called a softball, which means I then get to turn the question around and ask you, in writing Wicked, what did you learn about your characters that you hadn't known before you wrote the history?
Well, I'm not sure if that I hadn't known it at all, but I was just, I guess I was, this is going to sound like a very general answer, but I was struck by how, I was amazed that I could go back to the same story and the same characters and feel like there, for instance, there are lines that there's a line I came up with in the movie, in the first movie, that I just couldn't believe I hadn't thought of that I hadn't thought of for the show. But of course, the line is when she's up in when they're up in the attic of the palace, of the wizard's palace, and she says, "Over my dead body." And I just love that line for our story. But I just, it's such an obvious line. You know, Glinda is saying, like, you know, you have to go back and apologize, and you have to make peace, and you know, you have to somehow. And she goes over my dead body. I just love that line for that moment. I have other lines in the movies that I was stunned that I hadn't thought of earlier. But of course I was under a lot of pressure, and I was in, you know, I was under a lot of pressure. So when you have this amazing luxury of going back to something that, you know, at first it's kind of nightmarish, you know, to relive it all, but then you go, oh my goodness, you know, I can, in repose, sort of, I can think of things that and it's not about me, it's about being a writer and realizing that there's always something new, there's always a new idea that can come. It's amazing.
Julie Myers.
Hi, thank you all. To say this is an honor is the understatement of the century. Thank you all so much.
I'll be repeating the question.
My question is just that a couple of you have referenced game and game playing, and that it's a game and you're finding the right strategy. And I know Sondheim created games and was a game player. I wanted to know if you play games, if that's part of your hobbies.
So the question is whether the panelists are game players, just like Sondheim was, yeah, that's the question.
My wife and my kids are constantly trying to draw me into board games as they grew up, and I resisted. I will not play Scrabble. I agreed to play anagrams once, and I won, and so I said I'm done for the rest of my life. I do like puzzles. I like the aspect of moving pieces around until an image emerges. I don't want to play Monopoly.
Derek Luskatoff.
Yes. I'm curious
If you
about,
stand up, more people will hear you.
I'm curious what advice you have for writers legally. How do you get the rights to something? Like if you have an idea based on a Disney ride or creating a movie musical or a Broadway show, or if you want to do a revival of a work that has been done in the past that had a different writer. And then, do you have any lawyer recommendations? How do you find the right lawyer for a book writer? What things do you look for? That sort of thing.
So I'm going to repeat the question because I know that Winnie can't hear everything. But
No, I heard it.
I heard it. Terrific.
Well, you're on the right track with get a lawyer. You know, there can be heartbreak over not getting the rights, losing the rights. There are a lot of stories that are in the public domain. So that's what you can Google what novels and movies are in the public domain. If it's a Disney thing, I wouldn't try. But if if you have some sort of standing with Disney, you have to ask Disney, maybe they'll, they like to do everything, they like to exploit every possible aspect of their catalog, including rights. But in general, you have to absolutely make sure you have some kind of contract that gives you the rights. And you absolutely have to do it through an attorney, and I can't stress this enough, an entertainment law attorney. Not your cousin's husband or something, who may be a brilliant attorney, but they're not in entertainment law, particularly theater. I mean, it's different from films and television. So, an expert in that field, and I would go, personally what I would do is I would go to the drama school. You don't have to be a member. Just go to the drama school and get some advice about copyright and legal issues. It's possible they may recommend a specific lawyer. That's what I would do, and talk to people who know as much as possible. If you can do an original idea or adapt something in the public domain, say Shakespeare or Jane Austen or whatever, that's the easiest route you can go on. But every year there are a new batch of existing novels and plays and films that become part of the public domain. So you can keep up with that too. I mean, I can't remember what I was thinking about. Oh, I think it's Showboat. So right now, or recently, there's a sort of deconstructed version of Showboat. Well, Showboat just came into the public domain, but they knew it was going to happen. Years before, they knew the dates. And so they were able to work on it, but they just couldn't show it to anybody until they didn't need the rights.
Gatsby had the same.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, there are two great Gatsbys out there. One was at ART, one's on Broadway. I would just, to piggyback on what Robert says, do be in touch with the drama school, do become a member. They will give you really good advice, point you in the right direction. But also just a more global answer, you have to be very careful about how much work you do on something before you are confident that you either have or can get the rights, because he will break your heart. And I've seen this happen to people who dive into something, they've done a significant amount of work, and then they're just told, yeah, no, we're not interested. And you're left with something that's useless, basically.
Well, I'll just say one thing, that there's I don't know if it's an adage or a rule of thumb, that you shouldn't write the opening of your show until you've written the rest of the show, because you don't really know what you need to establish until you've actually written it. And as you write, you change, prose, everything. With that said, everybody I've ever worked with, we end up writing an opening anyway, and sometimes it's the most rewritten thing, in the whole show, for that very reason. That sometimes you need to start at the beginning, even if you throw that out.
Because Fiddler's been referenced endlessly, not endlessly, several times. But I mean, the famous story about Fiddler, of course, is that the show is basically finished. And Jerry Robbins said to Jerry Bock, Sheldon Hart, and Joe Stein, I needed an opening number that would tell the show, tell people what the show's about. And Sheldon would say, well, it's about this guy, he's got 4 doors. I said, no, I want something that will tell the audience what the show is about. And that's where tradition came from. But tradition, to Robert's point, was written after the show was finished. It got reworked, of course, the way all shows do. But I guess, I think it's important, sort of essential, to have an overall sense of what the beginning, the middle, and the end of your show is before you write anything. And that can be quite detailed. But sometimes if it's too detailed, it can become a kind of a straitjacket that will inhibit your imagination from going other places where it wants to go. This is a useless answer, but I think you do want to have the entire project in mind, but in a way that allows you to then discover it as you're writing.
Bree.
Hi, I'm Bree. My question for you is, when you were writing Wicked, the movie, did you approach it as a rewrite of a musical? And then my question for all of you is, how do you approach rewrites?
Oh, rewrites. Oh, what was the first part?
Did you approach writing the movie as a rewrite?
As a rewrite? Oh, well, my whole life is rewriting. So, it's not like I go, oh, now I'm rewriting. Like, I'm always rewriting. No, I did not think of it as a rewrite. We thought of it as something new. Something new that was going to be infused with the spirit of our show, that was going to hold the spirit of our show close and not deny, I use that word again, deny the show, but as its own thing. Because artistically, that's the most exciting to us. After all, we have a show. A lot of people love it. We're very proud of it. Why, in other words, we wanted to go beyond, in a sense, and make something new in a new medium. And in terms of rewrite, so what was the question about rewriting?
How do you approach rewrites?
It's sort of like in my answer already. I think of writing as rewriting, even though that might be a bit of a cliche. But in other words, first of all, I really try to open my mind. I mean, one of my biggest jobs doing the movie with, and I should mention Dana Fox, who was brought in by John Chu as another screenwriter. It was very helpful because it was a new perspective. One of my biggest jobs was to keep my mind open. And to not think, well, we did it this way, this is the way to do it. And I really went very far afield at times. I went into places that are not in the movie. This is just because I wanted to experiment. So I wanted to almost lean over backwards and experiment wildly and widely to make sure that I wasn't cleaving too intensely to the way it was, and that's how I approached it. But in terms of rewriting, that's how I approach rewriting as well. I don't want to have a closed mind. I don't want to think. What I really dislike, let's say when I'm being a showrunner and I see somebody come in with a script and I ask them to do a rewrite, is if they just did a little bit here and a little bit there, and they took this chair and they turned it to the side. I want to see somebody rethink how they might approach the same material. Because, like I just said before, there's always a new way. Don't be so precious with, it's got to be this way. So, now, it's not easy. You can't. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't throw out what makes your script wonderful just to be doing something new. So you have to be very careful. I may have sounded very wild just then, and like I just don't care, but I'm very careful to check in, to make sure that I'm not changing things so drastically that we've lost the heart of it.
So two of you have written shows with a Stephen, who's a great composer lyricist, namely Schwartz and Sondheim. And my question is, did you find yourself with any input into the score, or was that off limits?
Well,
there's no off limits.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no off limit. I mean, Winnie will answer it after I go. Steve and I would sit in a room together and talk endlessly about the show we were going to write. The talking is the beginning of the writing process, but it takes place before anybody puts pen to paper. And that always involved discussions as to what felt like it was going to be part of the score and what felt like maybe it wasn't going to be part of the score. And then that would all evolve and change. But Steve would always try songs out when they were unfinished, wanted feedback from me and vice versa. So I think it's the closer the closer the creators, the book writer, the composer, and the lyricist can come to becoming one voice and sort of one person, even though they're all going to be different parts of it, the more successful the show's going to be. And I would assume that with Steve and Schwartz, that was the same.
Well, there's nothing perfect in this world, but John Weidman's answer was perfect.
So we have just a few more minutes, and Jeff has 3 questions. I'm going to ask Jeff to pick his favorite and ask it.
Okay, so it's kind of all one encompassing question. So when doing the film of Wicked, there's a lot of new scenes, new things added to the story, and a lot of those were cut along the way. And my question is, what was the thing that you were saddest to see go that you wrote that didn't end up in the film?
Well, I guess a hard one. It's a hard answer because the truth is I'm really enjoying the movie and I'm not looking at it going, I wish this, I wish that. I really am not. And I'm not, it's funny, I'm not missing those deleted scenes ultimately. But I guess the hard part is how hard I worked on everything. And, if you wrote like 10 versions of a scene, like the train station scene, maybe 12, and you finally found a way to make it work, you felt, and it was a lot of moving parts, and then it's, but you know what? I really like it how it is. I really do.
Can we thank our panelists? Glad that the panelists joined us and all of you joined us. It was fascinating to learn this about book writing, which is underappreciated. So, hug your local book writer. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Shalom, I'm David Benkof, the Broadway Maven. The Broadway Maven is a vibrant educational community. Every month, members may attend 5 to 15 classes and other expert-led Broadway experiences, all for just $18. There's a membership link in the description. And here's a BroadwayCon playlist.